What happens when one of the most respected actors in Hollywood sits down for what should be a friendly chat, only to be met with relentless hostility and disrespect? In just 27 seconds, a television host managed to turn a routine interview into an explosive confrontation that would see a legendary actor storm off the set in disgust. This is the shocking moment when Anthony Hopkins had enough of Denise Welch on Loose Women. The morning started like any other on the Loose Women set. The studio audience buzzed with excitement, cameras were positioned perfectly, and the panel of hosts sat ready at their signature desk. Anthony Hopkins, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit, walked onto the stage to warm applause. The audience was thrilled. This was a rare opportunity to hear from an actor who had given the world unforgettable performances in films spanning decades. His presence alone commanded respect. Alongside Denise Welch sat the other regular panelists. Nadia Sawalha sat to her left, looking slightly uncomfortable as she shuffled her notes. Jane Moore was positioned at the far end, arms crossed, observing quietly. Kay Adams rounded out the panel, sitting between Jane and Denise, already sensing the tension that would soon unfold. The introductions were pleasant enough, with each host welcoming Hopkins and expressing their admiration for his work. But something was off. The way Denise looked at him suggested this would not be the respectful conversation everyone expected. Hopkins settled into the guest chair, smiling politely as he adjusted his microphone. He had done thousands of interviews in his career. He knew how to handle tough questions, awkward moments, and even the occasional difficult interviewer. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to happen. The first few minutes were standard fare. Questions about his latest project, reflections on his long career, stories from behind the scenes. Hopkins answered with grace and thoughtfulness, his deep voice filling the studio with warmth and wisdom. Then Denise took over. Her first question came with a sharp edge that caught everyone off guard. She leaned forward, eyes narrowed, and asked, "So, Anthony, you have played some really dark characters. Do you think that comes from a dark place inside you? Or are you just good at pretending?" The question hung in the air like a grenade. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Nadia glanced at Denise with a look that said, "Where are you going with this?" Hopkins paused, clearly taken aback by the accusatory tone. He smiled politely and responded, "Well, I think any actor draws from a range of emotions and experiences. It is called acting for a reason." Denise did not let it go. She pressed forward, her voice rising slightly. "But you have to admit, there is something unsettling about you. People say they find you intimidating. Is that something you enjoy?" The audacity of the question stunned everyone. Jane Moore sat up straighter, visibly shocked. Kay Adams looked like she wanted to intervene, but was frozen. Nadia Sawalha finally spoke up, trying to soften the blow. "I think what Denise means is that you bring such intensity to your roles. It is incredible to watch." Hopkins nodded appreciatively at Nadia, but Denise cut her off before she could say more. "No, that is not what I mean," Denise snapped. "I mean, do you like making people uncomfortable?" Hopkins' jaw tightened. His eyes, which had been kind and patient, turned cold. He took a breath and replied calmly, "I think you might be confusing my characters with who I am as a person. I do not set out to make anyone uncomfortable. I simply do my job." The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. The audience sat in stunned silence. Even the camera operator seemed uncertain whether to keep rolling. Denise leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, a smug expression on her face. She seemed to relish the discomfort she was causing. "Well, I am. Just saying what everyone is thinking," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "People find you creepy." Hopkins stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he might just let it slide, take the high road, and finish the interview with dignity. But Denise was not done. She turned to the other panelists, as if seeking validation. "Come on, you all know what I mean. He has got that vibe." Nadia immediately shook her head. "I do not agree with that at all, Denise. Anthony is a legend, and I think he deserves more respect than this." Jane Moore jumped in as well, her voice firm. "I have to agree with Nadia. This line of questioning is completely inappropriate. We invited Anthony here as a guest, and we should be treating him with the respect he has earned." Kay Adams nodded in agreement. "I think we should move on to a different topic. This is getting out of hand." But Denise would not back down. She scoffed at her fellow panelists and turned her attention back to Hopkins. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "We are just having a conversation. If he cannot handle a few honest questions, maybe he should not be doing interviews." The audience gasped audibly. This was no longer an interview. It was an attack. Hopkins sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the arms of his chair. He looked at Denise with an expression that was equal parts disappointment and disbelief. Then he spoke, his voice low and measured. I have spent my entire career being respectful to everyone I work with. Journalists, directors, fellow actors, crew members. I have never once walked out of an interview, but I will not sit here and be insulted on live television. Denise laughed. Actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that dripped with condescension. "Oh, come on, Anthony," she said. "Do not be so sensitive. We are just having a bit of fun here. This is what we do on this show." Hopkins shook his head slowly. "No, this is not fun. This is disrespectful, and I do not have to tolerate it." He reached up and removed his microphone, carefully unhooking it from his jacket. The studio fell silent. Even Denise seemed to realize that she had pushed too far. She opened her mouth to speak, but Hopkins raised a hand to stop her. "I came here today to talk about my work," he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet anger. "I came here to share stories and connect with your audience. But instead, I have been subjected to a series of personal attacks disguised as questions. I have no interest in continuing this conversation." The other panelists sat frozen, unsure of what to do. Nadia looked like she might cry. Jane stared at Denise with obvious anger. Kay covered her mouth with her hand, clearly mortified. Hopkins stood up, his movements deliberate and dignified. He smoothed his jacket and looked directly at the camera. "To the people watching at home," he said, "I apologize that you had to witness this. It is unfortunate when a professional opportunity turns into something ugly, but I hope you understand why I cannot stay." He turned to the other panelists, his expression softening slightly. "Nadia, Jane, Kay, thank you for trying to steer this in a better direction. I appreciate your professionalism." Then he looked at Denise one last time. His gaze was piercing, but he said nothing. He did not need to. The disappointment on his face said everything. As Hopkins walked off the stage, the audience erupted. Some people stood and applauded him, showing their support. Others sat in shocked silence, still processing what they had just witnessed. The camera stayed on Denise, who suddenly looked much less confident. Her smug expression had been replaced with something closer to panic. She tried to laugh it off, turning to her fellow panelists with a forced smile. "Well, that was dramatic," she said, attempting to sound casual. But no one was buying it. The atmosphere on the set was toxic. Nadia was the first to speak, and she did not hold back. "Denise, what were you thinking? That was completely out of line. You ambushed him. That was not an interview, it was an attack." Jane nodded vigorously. "Absolutely unacceptable. We should have stopped you sooner." Kay looked at Denise with a mixture of disappointment and anger. "You crossed a line today, Denise? A serious line. And now we are all going to have to deal with the consequences of your behavior." Denise tried to defend herself, but her voice had lost its confidence. "I was just asking questions," she said weakly. "He did not have to take it so personally." Jane cut her off sharply. "Do not even try to spin this, Denise. You know exactly what you were doing. You wanted to provoke him, and you succeeded. But at what cost?" The producers were scrambling behind the scenes. The show had gone completely off the rails, and there was no recovering from it. They cut to a commercial break, hoping to salvage what little remained of the broadcast, but the damage was done. Backstage, Hopkins was already in his dressing room, gathering his belongings. A production assistant knocked timidly on the door, asking if there was anything they could do. Hopkins was gracious, even in his frustration. "Thank you, but I will be leaving now. Please pass along my apologies to the crew. They did nothing wrong." It was a textbook example of class and professionalism, even in the face of disrespect. As he left the building, members of the crew stopped to shake his hand and express their own apologies for what had happened. He smiled at each of them, thanked them for their kindness, and walked out with his head held high. Meanwhile, back on set, the remaining time in the show was painfully awkward. Denise tried to move on to other topics, but the energy was gone. Nadia, Jane, and Kay were visibly upset, barely participating in the rest of the show. The audience remained subdued. The earlier excitement completely evaporated. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, the tension exploded. Nadia confronted Denise immediately. "Do you have any idea what you have just done? You embarrassed this show. You embarrassed us. And you disrespected one of the greatest actors of our time. How could you be so reckless?" Jane piled on. This is going to be everywhere, Denise. Every news outlet, every social media platform. We are going to be the laughingstock of television. Kay, usually the peacekeeper, was equally furious. You need to take responsibility for this. You cannot just brush it off like it was nothing. You hurt someone today, and you made all of us look bad in the process. Denise, now fully defensive, raised her voice. Why are you all attacking me? I was doing my job. If he could not handle a little bit of pushback, that is on him, not me. The room went silent. The three other panelists stared at her in disbelief. It was clear that Denise still did not understand the gravity of what she had done. Or perhaps she understood but refused to admit it. Nadia shook her head, her voice dripping with disappointment. You know what, Denise? I cannot even talk to you right now. You are completely delusional if you think you are in the right. She walked away, followed by Jane and Kay, leaving Denise standing alone. The fallout was immediate and severe. Clips of the interview spread like wildfire across the internet. Social media exploded with outrage. Hashtags supporting Hopkins trended worldwide within hours. People were furious, and they were not shy about expressing it. Comments flooded in, all of them condemning Denise for her behavior. How dare she treat a legend like that, one comment read. Anthony Hopkins is a class act, and Denise Welch is an embarrassment. Another person wrote, I have lost all respect for loose women after watching this. Hopkins deserves so much better. Even people who had never watched the show weighed in, appalled by what they saw. The video was played and replayed millions of times, each viewing adding fuel to the fire. Television critics wrote scathing articles about the incident. One headline read, Loose women hits new low with shocking disrespect toward Anthony Hopkins. Another declared, Denise Welch crosses the line in disastrous interview. Critics did not hold back. One wrote, This was not journalism. This was a personal attack disguised as an interview. Hopkins showed remarkable restraint in the face of blatant hostility. Another critic noted, The most telling moment was when the other panelists tried to intervene. Even they knew Denise had gone too far. But she refused to back down, and it cost everyone. The network that aired Loose Women faced intense pressure from viewers and sponsors alike. Calls for Denise to be removed from the show poured in by the thousands. Petitions were started, demanding accountability. Meanwhile, Hopkins himself remained silent. He did not issue a statement, did not do interviews about the incident, and did not engage with the online fury. His silence spoke volumes. He had said everything he needed to say on that stage. His dignity and composure in the face of disrespect were more powerful than any words he could have added afterward. The other panelists, however, were not silent. Nadia Sawalha posted a heartfelt message on social media, expressing her deep regret over what had happened. I want to apologize to Anthony Hopkins and to everyone who watched that interview, she wrote. What happened was unacceptable, and I am truly sorry that we did not do more to stop it. Anthony is a brilliant actor and a kind person, and he deserves so much better. Jane Moore echoed those sentiments, writing, I am horrified by what took place on our show. Hopkins is a gentleman and a professional, and I am ashamed that he was treated so poorly. Kay Adams also issued an apology, saying, This was not our finest moment. I hope Anthony knows that not everyone on that panel shared the same views. He has our deepest respect and admiration. Denise, however, remained defiant. In a brief statement, she said, I stand by my questions. I believe in challenging my guests, and I will not apologize for doing my job. The response to her statement was swift and brutal. People accused her of being arrogant, out of touch, and completely lacking in self-awareness. Even her supporters, few as they were, struggled to defend her actions. It was clear that Denise had miscalculated badly. She had assumed that her aggressive approach would be seen as bold and fearless. Instead, it was seen as cruel and unprofessional. The incident became a case study in how not to conduct an interview. Media training programs began using the clip as an example of what happens when respect and professionalism are abandoned. The contrast between Hopkins and Denise could not have been starker. On one side, you had a man who had spent decades earning the respect of his peers and the admiration of audiences worldwide. He had conducted himself with grace, under pressure, refusing to stoop to insults or pettiness. On the other side, you had a host who had prioritized confrontation over conversation, provocation over professionalism, and in the end, it was clear who had come out on top. Hopkins had walked away with his reputation not only intact, but enhanced. People praised his composure, his dignity, and his refusal to engage in a battle of insults. Denise, on the other hand, had damaged her reputation, possibly beyond repair. The incident also sparked a broader conversation about the culture of talk shows and the treatment of guests. Many people pointed out that this was not an isolated incident. There had been other examples of hosts ambushing guests, using interviews as opportunities to tear people down rather than build them up. The Hopkins incident became a rallying cry for change. Viewers demanded better. They wanted talk shows that were respectful, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in their guests. They wanted hosts who saw their role as facilitators of interesting conversations, not as antagonists looking for viral moments. And they wanted accountability when things went wrong. The network, facing mounting pressure, was forced to address the situation. They issued a public apology to Hopkins, acknowledging that the interview had fallen far short of their standards. They also announced that they would be reviewing their policies and procedures to ensure that such an incident would not happen again. But for many, the apology felt hollow. The damage had been done, and no statement could undo it. The real question was whether lessons would be learned, or whether this would simply be another scandal that faded from memory until the next one came along. For Anthony Hopkins, the incident was just another chapter in a long and storied career. He had faced far greater challenges than a rude talk show host, and he would continue to thrive in his craft. For Denise Welch, however, the consequences were far more severe. Her actions had alienated colleagues, angered viewers, and tarnished her professional reputation. Whether she would be able to recover remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: the day Anthony Hopkins walked off the loose, women said, would be remembered for a long time. It would be remembered as a moment when professionalism clashed with arrogance, when dignity triumphed over disrespect, and when one man reminded the world what it means to have class. The audience that day had come expecting a pleasant conversation with a Hollywood legend. Instead, they witnessed a masterclass in grace under pressure. They saw a man who refused to compromise his values, even when faced with hostility. And they saw the stark difference between someone who commands respect and someone who demands it. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to dominate headlines. Every news outlet had their own take on what had happened. Some focused on Hopkins' dignity, others dissected Denise's behavior. Still others examined the broader implications for the talk show industry. But at the heart of every story was the same simple truth. Anthony Hopkins had been wronged, and he had handled it with remarkable grace. The incident also led to some unexpected outcomes. Several other celebrities came forward with their own stories of being mistreated on talk shows. They spoke of hosts who had crossed lines, asked inappropriate questions, or created hostile environments. Their stories added weight to the argument that change was needed. It became clear that the Hopkins incident was not an anomaly, but rather a symptom of a larger problem. Talk shows had become too focused on creating viral moments and generating controversy. In the process, they had lost sight of what made them valuable in the first place: genuine conversations with interesting people. The Hopkins walkout served as a wake-up call for the industry. It forced producers, hosts, and networks to reconsider their approach. Some shows began implementing new guidelines for how guests should be treated. Others brought in media trainers to work with hosts on conducting respectful interviews, and a few shows even issued public commitments to prioritize respect and professionalism above all else. Whether these changes would be lasting or simply performative remained to be seen, but the fact that they were happening at all was significant. As for the key players in the drama, their paths diverged sharply. Hopkins continued his work, unbothered by the controversy. He focused on his craft, delivering powerful performances that reminded everyone why he was considered one of the greatest actors of his generation. Nadia, Jane, and Kay all distanced themselves from Denise in the aftermath. They made it clear, both publicly and privately, that they did not condone her behavior. Their willingness to speak out earned them praise from viewers who appreciated their integrity. Denise, meanwhile, became increasingly isolated. Her refusal to apologize or acknowledge any wrongdoing alienated even her closest allies. The incident became a defining moment in the history of loose women. It was a stark reminder that respect and professionalism matter, even in the fast-paced world of daytime television. It showed that viewers have standards and expectations, and that crossing those lines comes with consequences. Most importantly, it demonstrated the power of dignity in the face of adversity. Anthony Hopkins could have responded to Denise's hostility with anger. He could have shouted, insulted her back, or made a scene. But he chose a different path. He chose to remove himself from a toxic situation with grace and composure. And in doing so, he showed the world what true class looks like. The 27 seconds it took for Denise to destroy the interview will be remembered as one of the most shocking moments in talk show history. But the way Hopkins handled it will be remembered as a lesson in professionalism, dignity, and self-respect. The story of that day is not just about a celebrity walking off a set. It is about standing up for yourself when you are being mistreated. It is about refusing to tolerate disrespect, even when it comes from someone in a position of power. And it is about the importance of treating others with kindness and respect, no matter who they are or what they have achieved. In the end, the incident served as a powerful reminder that actions have consequences. Denise's actions had consequences for her career, her reputation, and her relationships with colleagues. But Hopkins' actions also had consequences. They earned him even more respect and admiration from fans and peers alike. They solidified his status as not just a great actor, but a great human being. And they provided a blueprint for how to handle difficult situations with grace and dignity. The lesson is clear. You can challenge your guests, you can ask tough questions, but you must always do so with respect. Crossing that line, as Denise did, leads only to disaster. The day Anthony Hopkins walked off the Loose Women set will go down in television history. It'll be studied, analyzed, and referenced for years to come. And at its core, it will always be a story about the importance of respect, the power of dignity, and the consequences of crossing the line. This was not just a moment of drama, it was a moment of truth. And the truth is this: when you treat people with disrespect, do not be surprised when they walk away. And when someone walks away with the grace and dignity that Anthony Hopkins displayed, they walk away as the clear winner, leaving behind only those who failed to recognize the value of basic human decency.